Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee meeting number 38. I didn't have a chance this morning to welcome everybody, but I will make sure I give this morning's very special welcome to John Buck. John, it's good to see you. To start off, we acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la
Ottawa is
nation
built on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Curry. Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Tierney. Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. We're not doing any development review today, so there is no chair statement. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest to make? No, thank you. Are the minutes of our meeting number 37 from Wednesday, November 5th confirmed? Thank you. The first substantive item is the item on development charges, the reimposition of corporate studies development charge. We will get a short presentation from Mr. Baker on that. There he is. And there is one delegation on that item. Then we will have the then we'll have the draft operating capital budget item. So we'll have a presentation on that. There are some motions and we have 3 delegations. There is an item number, we have no in-camera items today. There is an information previously distributed on the agenda today, number 7.1, the Affordable Housing Acquisition Preservation Fund. In anticipation that there might be motions that relate to that, but that have budget implications, I'm rolling that item into the budget item. So the budget item being number 5.1. If you are a delegate who is speaking to the IPD or we're anticipating doing so, please make your presentation during the budget discussion. I'll be ruling that any lines of inquiry from members and motions from members related to that IPD will be in order during the budget discussion. So with no further ado, I would invite Mr. Baker to come talk to us about the reimposition of the corporate studies DC.
Good morning, Chair. This process of having the reintroduction of studies was predicated on the Bill 23, which had removed the cost of studies as an eligible to be eligible for recovery from development charges. So under Bill 185, the provinces changed their tact and has recognize that studies are an important tool that municipalities need to charge for in order to advance development. And basically under Bill 185, they provided with municipalities with a fast track to reintroduce corporate studies into the background study. Next slide, please. So the reimposition of corporate studies was part of Bill 185. I'm just going to outline some of the timelines, the proposed rates, and the report recommendations. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned with Bill 185, the province allowed municipalities to reimpose development charges to pay for the growth-related studies. What we did is that we went through the various previous background studies and compiled a list of studies that were being funded in part from development charges and included that in a list of projects. And then the consultant was able to recalculate a citywide charge to reimpose those fees. The benefit of doing it today is that under Bill 185, the province allowed municipalities to sort of fast track this process. So they gave us a 6-month window. So if we reintroduce the studies, the growth-related studies into the background study, then we would not have to have a public meeting. We would not have to prepare a background study, and we would not have to be subject to an appeal at the Ontario Land Tribunal. Next slide, please. So the timelines, June 6th, Bill 185 received royal assent. We did our initial draft list of development charge studies in early July. It was finalized on October 10th. Today, we're presenting that information to Planning and Housing Committee, and it's going to go to hopefully Council next week. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the various rates have that are going to be reimposed and are in the increase in rates. So as you can see, these are citywide charges, so they're going to be applied on a citywide basis. The impact on the various residential use categories and the overall impact on the charge that's currently in place. The change that's occurring under this process is that in the past, some of these studies were allocated to specific service categories, such as under roads or water or sewer. What we're doing here is combining them into one corporate services list, and it's going to be applied on a citywide basis. So that's fundamentally the large or the biggest change that's occurring under this process, is that they're going to be a citywide charge, as opposed to being some of them are going to be were identified in the past within the various service categories. Next slide, please. So this is also the impact on the non-residential rates, again, on a citywide basis, looking at the non-industrial industrial use impact. So it does have an impact. It will increase the rates slightly and would be effective as of November 28th. Next slide, please. So hopefully today with the Planning and Housing Committee, we get an approval to reenact the charge for growth-related studies and start applying it as of November 28th. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. We have one public delegation on this before we come back to questions of staff. Mr. Jason Berggraf is online. Good morning, Jason. We're in your hands.
Morning. Thanks very much, committee. I apologize. I'd like to be there in person typically, but just couldn't do that today, but I appreciate the time. As you'll see from our written study, we don't have an issue with corporate studies being in the DC bylaw. We have often pointed to city staff to use those funds as designated. The issue today is the jump in the cost from the 2019 background study to the 2024 study. This cost increase is now 400%, with $50 million going to DC eligible study proportion versus the $9 million back in 2019. That seems like just an outrageous increased cost that's going on to the backs of new home buyers moving forward. I appreciate Gary's explanation about trying to bring some of these studies in from various elements outside the DCs, but the ability to have these studies in your DC was present in 2019, long before the studies were taken out of DCs and then put back in the past 2 years. So it really begs the question of why weren't these same studies included in 2019, and why such a significant cost increase from that time to now? Again, it's just another increase on new home buyers that are going to have to absorb these studies, which just increases or decreases the opportunity for housing affordability moving forward. So I think I'll leave it there, short and sweet. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berggraf. Do members have any questions of the delegation? I don't see any hands up. Okay, thanks, Jason. I'm sure someone will ask Mr. Baker the question that you posed. Thank Thank you for your intervention today. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Baker? Vice Chair?
Okay, well, I'll raise what the delegation raised. Why the increase? What accounts for the increase from 2019 to 2024, and how's it being justified?
Yeah, so when I looked at this, so if you compared what was in the, say, the 2019 DC study for corporate studies, it would only be a set amount of studies that were included, right? This particular document, if you looked at through the list of studies, there's road-related studies. Those would have been in roads, not in corporate studies in 2019. If you looked at water and wastewater, those would have been in water and wastewater, not in corporate studies. So this case, we've combined all those studies into one category. So that's resulted in the increase in the rates in development charges. But if you went back and looked out, and if you hived out those studies from the 2019 interim background study, then you would see that the impact would be very much similar to what it is right now. Plus, in 2019, it was an interim study. We were waiting for an update of the IMP and TMP. So, for example, the IMP has been updated. They require additional studies out to 20, I guess, to help identify projects out to 2046. So that cost escalation is also included in this corporate studies, but it would have been in 2019, 2014, 2009, included under water and wastewater. We're just including it in under corporate studies because of the legislation that allows us to reintroduce studies and to do it in this manner, right? So we're taking advantage of this particular situation and including them under one category. And they used to be under one category at one time. So this is nothing new per se, but that's the reason why. So if you went back and looked at the 2019 study, you would see studies in the various service categories.
Okay, and so we're permitted to do this under the legislation. Do you know if this is typical or other municipalities taking this approach as well and including these type of studies in development charge?
Yes, as far as I know, that other municipalities are following suit and doing it as similar to how we're doing it under a particular studies category. They probably weren't or aren't using the burying the studies into the various service categories, but keeping it separate. So this is kind of what we're going back to, is in a separate category to have all the studies grouped together. And maybe in the future they will be separated again, but for the time being, they're going to be back into one category. And of course, the costs have escalated because as 2019 was only an interim study, we didn't have an updated TMP and IMP. We still don't have an updated TMP, but they're anticipating that they require funds to do that updated TMP, and the IMP is finished. So those studies will are being included in this report.
And I guess it's a reaction to the amount of growth we're seeing in the city or anticipating in the next few years.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. So I kind of want to go back on one of the portions of your answer to the last, my colleague there. The public delegation said this equates to a, what, 400% increase, I think he said. But you said that with everything coming under one umbrella, really all the fees are being pushed into one envelope. That sounds like what you said. So what is the net increase then, the equivalent of?
Well, as I looked at it last night, I mean, the rates for corporate studies were maybe in the $150 range up until they were required to be removed in 2022. But that was because you're only looking at a subset of studies, right? So staff would have to go back and look at each category and see how much of that component of the rate was related to studies. So under water, you'd have to look at water, wastewater, roads. So in my opinion, I think it's comparable, just that you're looking at it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's kind of an apples to something new-ish, right? And it's basically because of the legislation allows us to do this. And so we're, like I said, we're taking advantage of it to reintroduce those studies. So instead of using water as a funding source for a master plan for water, it's going to be funded from this citywide account.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I understand it might be more of an apples to watermelon or something, but yeah, I think something like that would be helpful if it's truly appropriate. Like if it ends up being so different that it's not, then I understand. But right now, what jumps out is what the delegate said at 400%. And I think if we get a figure on what the actual net increases with when it was from when it was separated out, it would be helpful as a tool to compare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. It sounds like there might be a productive email to be sent to members of council just with some of the math around that answer before the council meeting.
No, that's fine. I'll compare the what was in the as of I guess November of 2022 and see what was being allocated for studies in the various components like water, wastewater, roads, recreation, and then use an equivalency to see what we're charging now. And I'm pretty sure that it's going to align, but that's my guess. But math's not necessarily my forte.
I can't say that. I don't see any other questions for you, members. Is this item carried? Thank you very much. We'll move on to the budget discussion, I think. So on the budget, I'm not going to ask the vice chair to read the roadmap motion at this point. We'll get that at the end. Could I ask though first the vice chair to read the technical amendment to what will be the roadmap motion?
Yeah, so the technical amendment, whereas on November 13th, council received and tabled the 2025 draft capital operating budget and associated committee budget books. And whereas it was discovered that corrections were required in the planning committee draft 2025 budget document tabled with council specific to affordable housing. And whereas Finance and Corporate Services has subsequently issued a revised Planning Committee draft 2024 budget, which includes the following correction, and that's on the table on the screen. Therefore, be it resolved that the Planning and Housing Committee receive and consider the revised Planning and Housing Committee draft 2025 budget document.
Thank you very much. I know we've got a couple of motions from members, and I'll ask them to make those or put those on the table once the presentation is over. But right now, Ms. Chi, we are in your hands. Or, sorry, Cyril. We're in your hands.
Morning, Chair, members of committee. So I'm here today with my colleagues Vivi and Debbie to present the planning and housing component of the budget, this year's draft 2025 budget. We can jump into the next slide. So I'll provide a little bit of a quick overview in terms of the overall operating budget for this committee, speak a little bit about the capital investments, and then Debbie and Vivi will talk about more of the highlights in terms of the term of council priorities or the key investments that you're going to see in the budget details. Next slide. So overall, the gross budget for this committee is just over $96 million. And then when we look at the recoveries and allocations, so again, these are allocations and recoveries that we do to capital programs or other internal services that, there might be work being done in one department that supports another department. So we kind of allocate that cost over if it's prevalent. Then on the revenue side, obviously the majority or all this revenue is basically related to the planning, building code, all the user fees that we have in this committee. And then that brings us down to a net requirement of $50 million. When you look at the FTE side, there's 2 incremental FTEs in this budget for 2025, one for housing. So as part of the housing long range financial plan, we continue to add a resource each budget to kind of support the housing initiatives in that portfolio. And there's also additional FTE for right of way in this budget. What you'll see throughout the committee meetings, new that we introduced last year, kind of enhancing a little bit again this year, is this is the second year of the climate change lens in our budget. So if you go through all the budget documents, specifically in the capital projects, if you look at every capital project, there's a category where we define the connection or the impacts to climate change. And we basically work with the climate change team to identify low, medium, or high impact to climate change resiliency and GHG emissions. So that's what this is trying to do, is provide a little bit more further breakdown in terms of those projects. Overall, there's 6 projects, capital projects in this committee from a capital perspective. Overall, 3 impacting climate change from the different initiatives. Next slide, please. So this is basically a breakdown of the service areas within this committee. So it's just basically identifying the respective budgets for each of those respective areas. Nothing really to highlight in terms of, what was said in the previous slides. Again, revenue is basically from all the fees that comes from the planning side of this committee's budget. Next slide. On the capital side, so again, 6 projects. The biggest one obviously is the housing services, 22.9 contribution to the affordable housing as per the long range financial plan. So if you rewind to last week, as presented, it was 18.9 in the housing long range financial plan. But then the companion, I'll call it the companion report same day, the VUT, with the approval of the VUT report that allowed for another $4 million to be allocated into the plan for 2025. Because of timing, we couldn't do that in the budget at the same time because we had to wait for the approval of the VUT report. And that's why you see that amended page that was circulated that Co-Chair Gower just read into it. On the planning and development side, so the biggest capital project there is related to LMS. So that's the 7.5 in the service enhancement side. And if you go through the budget book, that's basically exclusively funded through revenues from the fees within this committee. Next slide, please. Now, how do we pay for this from a capital perspective? So again, this is basically a breakdown of the funding that we do to support this capital program. It's a combination of reserves, development charges, and revenue. So the revenue, again, 7.5 million, that's exclusively supporting the LMS project. When you look at development charges, again, that supports, those projects that are eligible for development charges. And then the reserves is predominantly mainly the 22.9 for the affordable housing capital plan. I'll now pass over to Vivi to speak to some of the highlights on her side. Oh, sorry, Debbie.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Stewart. I'm the General Manager of Strategic Initiatives. I'm pleased to present to you the highlights of the Affordable Housing Draft Budget. And I think it's especially appropriate that we're going to be celebrating National Housing Day this week on Friday. So just want to call that out. La direction des projets stratégiques de logement élabore une politique de logement.
Our department is developing an affordable housing policy for new affordable housing in line with this last year, the department was able to optimize the federal government and provincial government funds to complete the progressive investment made thanks to the city funds. We were able to fund 1,200 affordable housing units and have a reserve of 1,300 housing units.
All 3 levels of governments have enabled us to accelerate the development of 1,200 affordable housing units and to build a healthy pipeline of 1,300 units. The 2025 budget gives the Strategic Housing Projects Branch the building blocks to push the city housing's mandate forward. The 22.9 million earmarked for the group will work alongside other city contributions. And so that could be land, it could be the tax waivers, tax incentives, as well as investments from all levels of government to contribute to the financing of 565 new affordable and supportive housing units that will begin construction in 2025. So something that the residents of the City of Ottawa will be able to see in terms of the progress of this work. By making effective use of the full suite of tools and all of the funds available from all levels of government, we are positioned to achieve the 500 unit per year target that has been set out in the Housing and Homelessness 10-year plan. Going forward, just a quick note, Strategic Initiatives Department will continue to help advance these projects through to completion, and we will also be exploring new and innovative solutions and partnerships to help achieve Council's goals related to affordable housing. So these are just some of the highlights of the budget and our work overall, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. For now, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Vivi.
Thank you, Debbie. The next slide, please. So these are the major capital funding that we're asking for in 2025 to continue with our work and our programs as you have seen in past reports. So the first one is the 3 million for our 2025 official plan review. We're going to start that because of the new population projections from the Ministry of Finance. So we start that process all over again, and looking at how those numbers relate to growth projections and what types of housing, employment, and so on. And then that work will then identify whether we have urban expansion areas or not. So this is the holistic look at how the city will grow with the new population numbers that the province had directed at us. Then from that information, we will have to go through the infrastructure and transportation master plans to service those new growth areas, and that gets rolled into the DC bylaw. So in the DC bylaw budget, you'll see in 2025, there's about 155K to start on that work, and that's 100% DC funded. The 3 million is also around 90% DC funded. The second bullet is to finish off our new zoning bylaw. That's also 90% DC funded, and that's primarily to for staffing to finish the work, which the zoning bylaw, the new bylaw, will come to you by the end of the year. And the last bullet that I have is 7.5 million for the land management solution, and this is fully funded through revenues, and it's for phase 2 to introduce the system improvements for planning services and right-of-way heritage and urban design. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have 3 public delegations to address the budget this morning, but before we do that, members have motions, and I'm going to ask Councillor Johnson first to read her motion.
Excuse me. Whereas existing capital resources within the City of Ottawa's affordable housing budget envelopes are focused on the delivery of new affordable housing development, whereas affordable housing asset preservation, is a stated objective within the community's 10-year 2020 to 2030 housing and homelessness plan, whereas the acquisition of existing affordable housing assets and their subsequent transfer to non-market operators can both prevent evictions among at-risk tenants and secure affordability in perpetuity within the community-owned housing stock. Whereas the Director of Housing Services already has delegated authority to execute acquisitions and already does so, on a case-by-case basis. Whereas a federal acquisition fund following from a federal budget 2024 announcement may be forthcoming, and whereas funding may flow more quickly to jurisdictions that demonstrate readiness. And whereas the current projection for revenues from the vacant unit tax in 2025 is 8.9 million, but could be higher given the revenue earned in earlier years. Therefore, be it resolved that to maximize readiness and expedite the disbursement of any new acquisitions funding, that 50% of revenue from the vacant unit tax above that forecast in the long-range financial plan for housing be allocated to an affordable housing acquisition fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Troster, you have a motion as well?
Thank you. Whereas the land transfer tax payable to the province on the close of any land acquisition in the province of Ontario, unless said transaction is deemed exempt under the provisions of the Land Transfer Act. Whereas the provincial land transfer tax is identified as a potential barrier to nonprofit multi-residential acquisitions in the Alliance to End Homelessness report. And whereas the province of Ontario has the sole ability to modify the Land Transfer Tax Act to create exemption classes of transaction. Therefore, be it resolved that the mayor write to the Minister for Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Premier of Ontario to request that multi-residential property acquisitions by a nonprofit housing provider be deemed exempt from payment of the land transfer tax. And be it further resolved that the mayor include in this request that municipalities purchasing lands on behalf of a nonprofit housing provider for the purposes of either affordable residential construction or housing loss prevention also be deemed exempt from payment of the land transfer tax. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. We'll move to public delegations. Peter Tilley will be followed by Bonnie Schroeder, who will be followed by Meg McCallum. I see Peter in the room. Come on up, sir.
Sure. I just have a brief direction. I'm wondering if I can read it in now.
Could I ask you to do that, at this committee?
Post delegations?
Yeah. Whenever you get the mic, you can introduce that and ask staff to take it as direction.
All right. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Bernard. Good morning, Mr. Tilley. Always a pleasure to see you here. Thanks for everything you do. We're in your hands.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, bonjour, and first of all, our thanks to City Council for the opportunity to present to you today. And secondly, I just wanted to take time to thank all of you as City Council for extend our thanks for the collaborative and often consultative manner in which over the last few years you've worked with both city staff and with the leaders from our sector to find solutions to the many tests we're all facing today in these very challenging times. So thank you for that. Merci beaucoup. The Ottawa Mission certainly appreciates the difficult position that City Council finds itself in with increasing numbers of people affected by the deficit in affordable and supportive housing, mental health, distress, substance use, job loss, and persistent inflation for essentials such as food and rent. Of course, all of these challenges have impacted our shelter. Almost 5 years after City Council declared a homelessness emergency, homelessness has returned to catastrophic levels. Our beds and overcapacity mats have been full every night since we've come out of the pandemic. As you are likely aware, in 2023, the number of asylum seekers at our shelter increased significantly, and by October of last year, 61% of our beds were occupied by asylum seekers. Given the lack of available shelter beds and throw-down mats and no beds available at other shelters that we could reach out to, on average, 27 people slept on chairs in our lounge area each night last October. Things have improved since then, but this is still a huge challenge for our shelter. This has impacted our entire operations, including frontline, housing, meal, and clothing services. So we support the City of Ottawa's efforts to enhance supports to newcomers through the construction of two-sprung shelters and other initiatives to meet their needs. Thank you. We also appreciate the continuation of the $30 million for new affordable housing initiatives that began last year, and the increases of $4.2 million for social housing and the $550,000 operating budget increase for Ottawa Community Housing Safety Services, respectively. We understand that the city only received 10 cents of every dollar raised by taxes, which is insufficient to meet the growing need for services provided, several of which have been downloaded by other levels of government, of course. We also understand that the city is not allowed to run deficits. These pressures are why we support the city's Fairness for Ottawa campaign to ensure that our community receives the support our residents deserve. We know that originally the property tax increase for this budget was to be 2.9%, but it's effectively raised to 3.9% when the transit levy is included. Having said this, I hope that most citizens in Ottawa would appreciate that Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Saskatoon, Windsor, London, Hamilton, Toronto, Halifax, and so on, many other municipalities have implemented increases that are much higher than 3.9%. Increasing property taxes a bit beyond the 3.9% threshold would also support new affordable housing projects to meet the increasing need and pressures on the shelter system. Council can also enact other measures to preserve and increase affordable housing, such as passing a bylaw, banning renovictions, and providing parcels of land for new builds. We thank you for the support within the city's poverty restriction strategy for tax clinics to bring more funds from the federal and provincial governments to low-income residents. We at the Mission have annually housed these tax clinics at our shelter for this purpose for many years. According to Ottawa Public Health, food insecurity has increased from 1 in 7 to 1 in 4 households in our community. This shocking increase is something we see daily with our food truck program, which started as a pandemic response with 1 truck, 5 stops, and 500 meals per week. And as most of you are aware, is growing to 2 trucks out at 38 stops to 10,500 meals per week. Many of these stops are adjacent to Ottawa community housing buildings. This program feeds people at a time when the risk of hunger has never been greater. This program has served more than 1 million meals since its inception and has been funded primarily through the generosity of our donors. Times are tough for us all. Please remember that food insecurity can often lead to serious chronic conditions and poor mental health, eventually leading to increased interactions with the healthcare system and emergency services. The Mission's food truck program is certainly making a difference in many of our councillors' respective communities. Thank you once again for the time to speak to you this morning, and merci encore. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Merci, Peter. Je vois qu'il y a quelques questions. En premier,
Thank you
conseiller
so much. I
Johnson.
think we have a couple of questions. Councillor Johnson.
Highlighting sort of the intersectionality of issues that are facing you as an organization. I think one of maybe the unintended consequences of the governance of planning and housing and community and social services, splitting the housing files, supportive housing over there and construction over here, is that we can lose sight of the fact that housing is a system and it's part of a context of many other services that are required in order to support our most vulnerable. So although we're not talking exclusively about food insecurity today, people do have to choose between food and rent often. And so I think it's worth bringing into the conversation. I'd like to know, for your clients, for your residents, your neighbors, what kind of work do they attain as they're trying to come out of a shelter? What kind of wages can they expect as they're trying to, get out of the shelter system and move into more permanent housing?
It's a great question, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, more than likely, the reality is going to be minimum wage jobs for a start, but also seeking possibly part-time jobs. We do have people staying in the shelter, and we don't want people staying in the shelter who are working right now because they can't afford housing out there. So we try and work with them quickly to divert them and move them on out of the shelter system. But you look at our culinary food services program that we're graduating 70 to 80 people a year now into that industry. Those are better paying jobs. And these are people formerly homeless, and now a significant number of them are newcomers to this country, people who are pharmacists, teachers, dentists in other countries. And the other one we've just started, you may have seen, is a maintenance services program. We've launched the announcement of it, and we're going to launch it in January, where we're now going to mirror the food services training program and begin training people to be superintendents in buildings across this city, whether apartment or hotels.
So would you agree then that a barrier to having people move out of your shelter system is a lack of deeply affordable housing?
Absolutely. It's just a shame when the backlog is because people who can be housed, who are ready to be housed, people who aren't suffering from high acuity mental health issues, who in that case can be housed, but with significant wraparound support. So if those significant wraparound supports, whether mental health or addictions, aren't there, these people sometimes are served better in a congregate setting before they would have been in institutions in the mid-90s before those were closed down. So they found their way into the shelter system. We had to expand our number of beds by 60 in the mid-90s just to meet the people coming out of the mental health institutions. So it is a barrier, but those people we can expect need services like ours if we're the wraparound support at a congregate setting. But it's a shame when people who are staying at a shelter are capable of moving into housing now. They have low to moderate acuity issues, and they're definitely ready to be housed now, but affordable housing isn't there. Maybe they're only able to handle a certain type of a job, or they'd have social service supports, but affordable housing isn't available to them, and it's not an option often.
Thank you very much for that. I understand that, generally speaking, individuals and families that earn $59,000 a year or less struggle to make our current rents. And so the deeply affordable housing through other mechanisms than just what's being created through attainable housing, which is a new term, new to me, in the last couple of years, this idea of attainable housing replacing what we used to consider affordable housing is not meeting the needs of those individuals who are staying in your shelter. So we can't actually break free of that, launch their economic success elsewhere and feed into the local economy without creating that deeply affordable housing. We end up entrenched in systems that cut off our nose to spite our face. So thank you very much for doing the hard work that you do. And I'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
It's a great observation. Thank you. Attainable. Yes. And people don't realize we have, thanks to the city of Ottawa, we do have several housing workers that are paid for by the city and a diversion worker in our shelter. And we have, through our own budget, we added several others, and we did place 270 people into affordable housing last year through our housing department and diverted almost another 50 quickly out of the shelter when they arrived into the system. So we're doing our best to move people into affordable housing. You can imagine how hard our team is working. A, hi, I'm calling from the shelter, and B, we are promising you this person will be a good tenant, and we're ready to stand behind that. But we're moving them on into housing.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Troster.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everything you're doing. You did mention the need for protections against rent evictions, and that's something that's going to be coming back to that, to this committee in a couple months. Within the context of the overflow that you're seeing and the tremendous load at the Mission, do you have a sense of the impact of rent evictions on your shelter occupants? Like, are you hearing stories of folks who have been evicted and that's why they end up with you? Do you have any sense of what those numbers are like?
Absolutely. On a person by person case, I've personally spoken to people. I get out and get to know most of the people who have come under our roof and chat with them, especially on the nicer summer days and the cold winter days when they're out on the street. But and several of them have identified they were rent evicted, and there was nothing they could have done to stop that from happening. They may not have been the best tenants from the conversations I've had, but they don't belong to be there. And I've personally had friends who have had to deal with rent evictions where they've had to move out of the space they're in because the landlord is renovating the building.
Yeah, and similar to the conversation that we had when that first came to committee, we talked about how ideally the province would fix this because it's a lack of provincial tenancy control that's leading to a lot of these rent evictions. Similarly speaking, I'm glad you touched on the issue of property taxes and the very poor funding model that cities have, 10 cents on every tax dollar. Some say actually 7 to 8 cents. But all that being said, something that we heard when the budget was presented to council when it was initially introduced was this idea that when we raise property taxes, it raises rents, and that's going to still leave people worse off. I'm interested to hear from you why you think a slight increase in property taxes would make a difference to the folks in your shelter system, because my argument has always been, well, if you keep property taxes artificially low, you raise user fees on everything else. And so for someone who's living in poverty, it's actually much more expensive for them. I'm just interested in your assessment of that within the context of a low tax increase in this budget compared to many other cities across the province and across the country.
I've just watched over, it's a great question and observation, Councillor Troster. I've watched over the years us tightening our belts and the sacrifices being made of commitments of 2% a year when cost of living was around 2% a year. But we're a city, and with the downloading that we've seen over the year, with the difficulty to bring other partners at other levels to the table, and that's where most of the taxes go when we pay our taxes, it has been a challenge. And I think we're all seeing now these pressures that that we as a city haven't had the ability to move into what would be federal or provincial territory, building affordable housing units, or doing so at a very small scale. If a tax increase, and you hate to see the property owners having to bear the burden of that tax increase, and I get that, but it would lead to affordable housing units and other services, and yeah, less people in the shelters. A small portion of your budget, and I've shared this with you as city councilors, what amounts to about $55 per person per night goes towards us, and the rest of that comes from our donors. All that job training program I talked about, our addictions program, the majority of our mental health supports, our partnerships with the Royal and CMHA, those come from other levels of government. So many of the other services we provide, the city pays for basically the beds, the meals, the clothing, the essentials, the frontline intervention and protection for the safety of the people under our roof. It's a good deal for $55 per person per night.
But you could do more with more.
Yes, always.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Councillor Troster. Councillor Johnson, Councillor Didas.
I don't know that I have a question, maybe more of a comment. I wanted to thank you and your team and all of our community service providers that are on the forefront. You are a shelter by definition, but you're providing every single service that our most vulnerable community needs to get back up on their feet. And you're also advocating for their well-being and the well-being of all residents. I think it's interesting because I have been on council, this is my second term, but I've been a watcher of municipal politics for many years, and I have never seen a council so motivated, so much so that we put it in our own strategic priorities to address this issue. However, we're at the same time of coming just off the final edge of a pandemic. We've got, inflation's going up, job loss. We have multiple implications for people's finances. So I wanted to share my appreciation that you recognize the many efforts that we are taking, whether it's to find, every stone unturned for housing. I know that Debbie and her team are looking at properties across the city that are municipally owned to turn them into affordable housing and work with our community partners through that. We're doing every effort to address the migration issue that is globally impacting cities by looking at a myriad of options for housing, even short-term transitional housing for folks. But I just wanted to take note of the fact that you guys are at the front of all of this, and it is greatly appreciated. And I think that it's very valuable to have groups like yourself and other social service providers to come and speak to us, whether it's at this committee or community social services or any other committee, because it grounds us, and it helps us recognize that although we are taking actions, there might be more that we can be doing. So like I said, there's no question there. It's more of a comment, and it is greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you, Councillor Dudas. And I know you were at the forefront of some initiatives when we were first trying to deal with some of the pressures we were facing last year. And yeah, I will reciprocate, and I'm genuine when I say, I've been at the mission 11 years, and I was before that at the food bank. I've never seen city staff and city council working so good. For years, we were frozen on our per diem rates for about 8 years. While our costs were escalating, and we would go to city staff and city council and be told people shouldn't be staying in shelters. They need to move into affordable housing. Yeah, we get that. Help us, and we'll do that. But in the meantime, they're there, and we're gonna keep shaking the bushes of our donors or looking at cutting programs. So we thank you for your recognition. And most of you came down for a tour and saw the work we're doing, and that we're a community hub of job creation, of a primary care clinic, classroom where people get their post-secondary or other skills, and the housing department that moves people into housing. All those services beyond the essentials that we're providing. Thank you for getting involved and recognizing that.
Merci, Conseillère Plante.
Councillor Plant? Thank you so much.
Very super quick question for you. One of the things I hear a lot from our frontline workers is because of a lack of services in neighboring communities, Cobourg, Prescott Russell, Kingston, et cetera, a lot of people are coming here to use our shelter system and our harm reduction services. Can you validate that in any way? I know we don't ask people where they come from, but I'm just wondering what you're hearing.
Yes, I can circle back with you, Councillor, and I will do that. I'll follow up when I get back with our intake team just to get an idea of those numbers. It's generally, we do find that people from smaller communities gravitate to the big cities. It's why you'll hear communities outside of Calgary and Edmonton, and I've seen that where we've really reduced the number of people who are homeless in our community. Yeah, they've moved to the big cities because the action, I hate to say that, whether drugs or other things are here in the big cities. And but also the services are so extensive here. You look at the meals we can put on at an Ottawa Mission, a Shepherds of Good Hope, or a Salvation Army or Cornerstone versus a very small Salvation Army in a local community. So people we found gravitate to the cities, but I can get those numbers for you from our intake team.
Yeah, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Peter. I don't see any further hands up.
Thank you for your time.
Yep.
And all your good work.
We will move on to our next public delegation. Bonnie Schroeder is with Age Friendly Ottawa. Bonnie, are you in the room or are you online? I've lost Kelly. I wonder if the coordinator could bring Ms. Schroeder into the conversation. Oh, not online either. Okay. So we'll go straight to our third delegation, Meg McCallum.
Perfect. Great. Good morning. Thanks for having me today. I'm the interim executive director of the Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa, and I'm here representing over 70 community agencies and partners in the housing and homelessness sector in Ottawa, all working together to end homelessness. I'd like to start, like Peter did, by thanking city staff and members of the committee and council for the work that you do and for the ongoing collaboration with the sector to address all the pressing issues we have in our city. I'm here to talk about the draft budget, but I want to start by putting it in the context of the needs in our city. According to the most recent data available on rentals.ca, it costs just over $2,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in Ottawa now. The good news is that that rate hasn't really changed since last year. The bad news is that this is far out of reach for anyone on a pension or receiving social assistance, for students, or for most single parents, or truthfully anyone earning below $82,000 a year. Almost 1/4 of rental households in Ottawa are paying more than they can afford. 2023 marked the highest numbers on record in Ottawa's shelter system, and an estimated 10% of people in shelters are employed but just can't find a home they can afford. We're waiting to hear the results of the city's point-in-time count that took place last month, but we know that the numbers of people living in encampments is growing each month. It can take 4 to 8 years to get subsidized housing through the social housing registry. And even for people with urgent medical priority status, the wait can be up to 2 years. Council set a term of priority council, council set a term of council priority to create a city that has affordable housing and is more livable for all. And I would urge you to use all of the tools at your disposal to achieve this goal: funding, policy and program design, advocacy, and innovation. Because if we don't keep up with the need, we fall further behind. We know that the only way to truly end homelessness and tackle the housing crisis in our community is through scaling up nonprofit housing. We need to prioritize solutions that increase the amount of permanent nonprofit affordable housing, along with the supports that tenants need to stay housed. We also know that we're losing low-rent private market unit rental units faster than we can build new ones. And while we need to focus on adding new units, we need to stop the loss through nonprofit acquisitions. Acquisitions prevent people from becoming homeless. When people who have had stable housing for years lose their housing due to demolition or renovation, the chances of finding something affordable in today's market is slim to none. So as critical as it is to house people experiencing homelessness, ensuring that people stay housed is equally important to reduce the flow into the shelter system. If we relieve the pressure on the emergency part of the system, we can target our efforts to best results at the prevention end and with permanent housing. So let's talk about what's good about the city's housing budget. We are seeing modest increases in operations funding. We really appreciate the stable and predictable capital funding, the willingness to explore new financial tools, and the commitment to the ongoing advocacy that's needed with other orders of government. But let's face it, the unfortunate reality is that despite these best intentions, the needle continues to move in the wrong direction. And we're talking here about people's lives. The housing crisis was created over decades, and it's exacerbated by factors well beyond our control, and responses require funding beyond what's available to the municipality. So I urge council to push as hard as you can to increase our city's investment toward nonprofit housing, both new development and acquisitions. It's cheaper, smarter, and more compassionate to invest in making sure that everyone in our community has a home. Thank you.
Hi, Meg. Thank you so much for being here. I have a few questions. You did mention encampments, and I was with you at the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference, where, of course, this was a hot topic because every community across the country right now is dealing with encampments. I do like to remind folks who get upset when they see the odd tent that we have largely avoided large semi-permanent tent encampments in city parks in Ottawa because of all the indoor space that we've opened. But we do have a problem because the populations who tend to hang out in encampments or shelter in encampments, there's not a good solution for them right now within the shelter system. So it's often couples, or it's people with acute addictions, or it's people who've experienced trauma in the shelter system, or it's people who might have a pet. Those are the ones that we talk to in my office. I'm curious to hear from you what policy solutions you would like to see from the city in dealing with encampments within a human rights perspective and having resources for those specific populations, because to me, it seems like a serious gap in our system if we're hearing the same thing from folks who cannot or will not go to shelter.
Just a quick intervention here. We will keep this discussion on passage of the budget today or not. I'm interested to hear the answer, but keep it brief and maybe.
Okay,
then we
well,
can
I'm
get
also
back to the
interested in
budget.
other investments that you'd like to see in the budget to specifically tackle this issue.
For sure. So just a couple of things. First of all, the focus on housing as a human right. So any encampment response should not negate anyone's human right to housing, as minimum as that may be. Secondly, I think you've hit the nail on the head that when you're trying to think about solutions, you need to be informed by data. So you need to know what are those gaps that are keeping people from accessing services and things that are available already in the community, and where do we need to create new services. So you spoke about couples and people with pets, for example. It's very easy to see what the responses should be to those things, and where we can do some work together as a community sector, providing those frontline services with the support of the city to create solutions that work for specific populations.
That's great. Now, another program that's been really successful, and I don't know if it's captured, I believe it'll be captured in the community and social services budget, but it is on the housing spectrum, is our cash subsidies that we've used as diversion and also to help people get out of shelter. My understanding is we have funding from other levels of government for 2 years. What do you think of this as a stopgap measure until we build up more nonprofit housing?
For sure. And I really do see that type of rent supplement or housing benefit as eviction prevention and prevention of housing loss. So it's an important tool. If we can keep people out of the shelters, it keeps them from taking on a homeless identity, and it prevents a lot of trauma. So keeping people in housing, if the only issue they're facing is they don't have enough money to stay where they are, well, that's an easy solution, relatively easy. It's just money. But sorry for being simplistic, but yeah, so it is definitely a part of the tools in the toolbox that we need to access if we don't have a sufficient stock of affordable housing.
You also talked about the need for diversion. And
Sorry, the Community Services Committee is coming up, I think, next week on the 26th. So some of these programs are part of that budget. Can we keep this to the Planning and Housing Committee budget?
Yeah, no, I
please?
appreciate that. Anyway, I'm just curious to hear from you if there's additional investments that you think are missing from this plan. I know that you came and presented when in terms of our long-range financial plan for housing. But as we look for the 2025 budget, are there things you see low-hanging fruit that we're not dealing with here?
Well, low-hanging fruit. The thing is about that creating nonprofit housing, creating a permanent affordable housing is an expensive proposition, and it does take time. We really appreciated that the city did put 30 million into the capital budget last year. We understand that there are pressures this year that are preventing that, and that it wasn't sustainably funded as it was done through reserves last year. I would echo the conversation that took place with Peter just now in terms of property tax rates. There are a lot of constraints out there that are imposed upon the municipality or that the city has to just roll with the punches on. But one thing that the city can do is set the tax rate. And keeping that tax rate artificially low does not do us any good. The median income in Ottawa is over $100,000 a year. For most people living in the city of Ottawa, the burden of a tax increase is not a hardship, whereas it is definitely a hardship for people who are on the streets, who can't afford their housing, who are choosing between housing and food.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for being here. Meg, recently there's been a discussion in the city around welcome centers for newcomers. You've talked here about an acquisition fund, and the chair has ruled that in order for our discussion today. I just wonder, some of the arguments that we were hearing from some people was that we should be investing in more bricks and mortar housing and not temporary shelter systems for these welcome centers. And that came along with a lot of other negative messaging. I'm just wondering, on the acquisitions fund and other areas that you're advocating for, would this help with some of the pressure on the overall housing spectrum, and your views on how we welcome newcomers and the pressure on our, again, bricks and mortar housing stock?
Great. Thanks. There's a few elements in there, so I'm going to parse them out. So first of all, with regard to acquisitions, as I said earlier, I really do see this as eviction prevention and housing loss prevention. A lot of times what we see is that the buildings that are being put up for sale are older, lower quality, affordable, what we call naturally occurring affordable housing stock. It tends to be located in low-income areas where we have a higher percentage of people who are newcomers or who have other systemic discriminatory factors facing their families. And so, acquisitions can play a really clear role in protecting stock, keeping people housed, keeping vulnerable populations from having to access our shelter system. So that's that part of it. In terms of the way we welcome newcomers to our city, I really do believe that Ottawa is a welcoming city, and that there is space and the goodwill from the people of Ottawa to welcome people to our city. And I really appreciate the city's role in helping us address the challenges of the wave of immigration that we're seeing right now. In terms of the way we manage that, in a perfect world, we would have enough affordable housing stock, and we would have a sufficient housing supply in the city across the country to deal with all of the population increase demands that we see, because we are in a position where our stock of housing is stretched very thin, and the housing has become a financialized commodity. We find ourselves in this situation where we don't have sufficient affordable housing stock, and we do need to create those emergency solutions. I really appreciate the work that the city staff has done. They've been very deliberate and thoughtful in terms of making sure that they've double checked all their numbers through the independent Collier's assessment, and that they're working very closely with people in the newcomer service community agencies to make sure that they're developing a response that is most appropriate for the newcomers. They're the people with the expertise in addressing newcomer needs, and they're being well consulted on this issue.
Thanks very much for that comprehensive answer. I'll be interested to see how people vote on the acquisition fund, given what you've said about the welcome centers. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Menard. Councillor Plante.
Bonjour. Yes. Hi, Meg. Nice to see you. Very quickly, I went out of my natural habitat a couple weeks ago, and I did the 9 run in Councillor Gower's ward in Stittsville. It's not very often I leave downtown, but I did, and it was awesome. But when I went to a big box store on my way home, I noticed there was people living in their cars in the parking lot, and I went to go chat with them, and they had talked about how they lost their housing and they were sort of living out of their cars and showering at gyms. They had like a whole routine. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that, because we seem to think of poverty as like a downtown issue, but it's absolutely not a downtown issue from what I'm hearing and what I experienced. And I guess kudos to the Walmart. They sort of let them stay there and they don't bother them. But I was just wondering if you could talk about poverty in areas outside of downtown quickly.
For sure. And I'm also someone who lives in a rural area, so definitely familiar with that sight of seeing people staying in their cars. Just to go back again to what Peter Tilley was saying earlier in terms of people coming to access services in the downtown core, what we do know is that if there are service gaps in rural and suburban areas, then people will go to where they can access those services. We do see that disproportionately affects young people. It disproportionately affects women fleeing abuse in their homes, but it also just affects people who can't find affordable housing. A lot of times in the rural and suburban communities, it's because there isn't a sufficient stock of rental housing, that most of the housing is owned. And it also may be that people can't find housing that is accessible, because a lot of times in those older rural communities, it's a lot of 2-story homes. And when you have someone who can no longer age in place, if they can't access services in their community, they may come downtown. So there's a lot of factors there.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. You're sort of confirming what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Plant. Meg, I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for your delegation today.
Great.
It is always good to have you here. The Council on Aging, I believe Bonnie, but potentially another representative appear to be online. So I'll ask the coordinator to bring them into the conversation, please. Sounds like it's Ms. Schroeder who will be joining us. And Bonnie, if you can hear us, you need to unmute. There we go.
There we go. Hi there.
Good
Uh,
morning. Welcome. You've got
it-
5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee. We're in your hands.
Thank you. So I am the Director of Age Friendly Ottawa with the Council on Aging, and I support the 4 action committees: health, housing, transportation, and income security. This will be one of many delegations I'll be making related to the budget. We previously presented at the council where we gave our response to the official plan in 2021. We asked the question, where will we age, not only in place, but in our community, remaining as independent as possible? This is a key question that many older adults are asking in Ottawa. And since we're now at 17% of the population and expected to move to 25% by 2035, we are a unique and distinct demographic of almost 200,000 people in Ottawa. I'm here to make 2 recommendations: more nonprofit housing for older adults and incorporating accessible design. And when we talk about affordable housing, we should always include accessible, affordable and accessible. We do not need reminders of the housing crisis and the number of people who are finding it difficult to find affordable places to live. This is amplified with older adults, many on fixed income with little opportunity to increase it. There are more, they have more unique needs for accessible housing and access to social and community services to remain independent and age in their community. There are also decreasing affordable rental options, and while increasing renovictions are disproportionately impacting older adults, leaving low-income older adults with no affordable options. And in fact, in 2022, 28% of Shepherd of Good Hope shelter clients and 77% of their residents in supportive housing were over the age of 50. We're very appreciative of the efforts the city has made to address the housing needs of older adults. Thank you for the generous distribution of the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund and the Provincial Building Faster Fund. We've seen progress with many affordable older adult housing developments, including Elwood House, St. Patrick's Home, Rideau Nonprofit Housing, Wigwamen, and Salis. We are also celebrating a donor-funded creation of 2 NORC SSPs, and that stands for Naturally Occurring Retirement Communities with Support Services, in Ottawa's East End's Councillor Kavanaugh's riding, a much-needed, cost-effective, and innovative solution to meeting the needs of older adults in Ottawa. These are all great starts, but we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that everyone in Ottawa has a safe and adequate home to go to every night. In fact, earlier last year, we hosted 7 community conversations about age-friendly housing in 7 wards across the city. With over 250 older adults and over 600 people responding to our survey, we found affordable, accessible housing options a priority, as well as access to services were the main ones. We also know that older adults want to stay in their own home as long as possible and out of institutional settings. Not only is it a preferred option, it is less expensive to support people in their own home and in their community. Therefore, the COA would like to bring 2 recommendations forward to improve age-friendly housing. We strongly recommend the capital expenditures to support nonprofit purpose-built rental increase to 30 million and 18% of these units be suitable for older adults in walkable and connected neighborhoods, near to amenities and transportations. We also encourage multi-bedroom units to provide the needs of intergenerational living, young families, and newcomers to Ottawa. We also encourage the incorporations of the principles of universal design in all new builds and ensure 20% in all renovated. We would like the city to develop a bylaw to have grab bars installed in all bathrooms as a new standard. We believe that this budget should reflect these two priorities for older adults. We thank you for your attention to our deputation.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. I do see a question for you from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
Yes, as a co-liaison on older adults, yeah, my antenna's up because we realize that once people are on fixed incomes, they're really scared if anything happens in terms of their housing. And so they need guarantees. I know that with Ottawa Community Housing, we have 22 buildings specifically for older adults. But I think we're actually looking at models in the future where we're blending with other communities so that it's not as isolating and it's more mixed for the future. But important that we use our budget for large scale builds so that we can build these communities. And I take your point about grab bars. You've made that clear that and some simple things like that could really help, even if it's not an older adult in the building or in the unit right now. It could be in the future. Just these simple things, probably for all our homes, as a matter of fact. So appreciate your work, and I don't have anything specific. I think we're all on the same page on this, and the other part of it is in terms of the affordable housing is building services into it. We talk about support services, and we need that for seniors as well. As you mentioned about the NORC, which is in the West End, we're working on pilot projects. It shows that for a very few dollars, you can have coordinated services in buildings so that people are not isolated. So that's a part of the building projects that we incorporate, space for these opportunities. And so that's something that I know OCH is looking at big time. So thank you, Bonnie. I look forward to, I know we're going to be seeing you at other committees as well, no doubt. But I think that we've got a lot of work to do. And as you said, this is a growing demographic that some of us are in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. I will make comment about there are 171 vertical NORCs that we have mapped in Ottawa, buildings with more than 30%. Over 50% of them are 50% or more. And we're working with city partners and making sure those services. We would like to see support services in all NORC buildings across, and then look at the horizontal NORCs in neighborhoods and support them. We're getting calls from community associations, buildings, condos, and they are all across the city, 9 of them in rural communities. And while older adults do want
Bonnie, I apologize, Bonnie. We're staying fairly far from this committee's mandate.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
I was just waiting for the chair to say that.
Thank you very much.
Chair Dudas can remind us when the Community and Safety, or sorry, the Community Services Committee is meeting at some point, but it's next week, the 26th, something like that.
Yes, next Tuesday.
Yeah, already in my calendar. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Ms. Schroeder. I don't see any further questions for you.
Okay.
So we'll now turn to questions of staff. And we have the motions on the table, one of which I'm expecting maybe slightly amended. Are you ready to do that now? Do you want more time?
Well, we did send it to the committee chair, but you're okay for me to read it out? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
And then I can speak to it if that's helpful. Okay. All right. It is to add another be it further resolved to the motion. Well, actually two. Be it further resolved that the mayor include in this request that the city of Ottawa be permitted to establish a municipal land transfer tax in line with the existing tax in the city of Toronto, with the revenues from such a tax being dedicated to establishing revenue for Affordable Housing Acquisition Fund. I have it twice here. No, I think that's it. So this is just simply to say the city of Toronto has had a municipal land transfer tax for 20 years. The city of Ottawa is now a city of more than 1 million people, and we're struggling with a lack of revenue. I think that asking the province to consider giving us similar powers, given our size, given the scope of the challenges that we're trying to solve, I think is entirely appropriate. It doesn't mean we have to do the thing. It just means we would have permission to do the thing. I think there is a conversation that has really begun about this concept of charter cities, of bigger cities within this country having more power to raise the revenue that we need to solve the problems that have been downloaded onto us. So I would hope for support from this committee. This is simply raising this as a possibility. Doesn't mean it's something we're necessarily going to do, but it's simply pointing out that the other biggest city in the province has had this power for 20 years. And it's time that we start thinking about new revenue sources to solve the problems that we have in our city. Thank you. I just have a question for staff. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. If you want to take 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify because I'm seeing two numbers floating around. One is the $18 million capital investment in affordable housing, but another saying it's actually close to 31 if we include staffing to support those investments. I'm wondering if somebody could just explain that. The summary that was sent by the committee chair, the note.
Yeah, so Chair.
Lumped that together.
So the 18.9 was the adopted LRP number, which is now 23.9.
Right.
So that's the total amount going into the affordable housing. I think in that summary, if I recall off the top of my head, I think it adds all the other contributions into affordable housing as a bigger envelope. And I think that's right at 30.
So that includes value of land? Or is that simply staffing?
It would not count the value of land.
Okay.
I can certainly follow up offline with it. But that would be like the other contributions that we're making outside, like a cash budget type contribution in this budget.
Okay. Okay. So I understand that last year, at my urging, we doubled the capital budget for affordable housing to 30 million. Why can't we do that again this year? I know what the answer is, but I just need to get it on the record.
So Chair, exactly. So last year I did put that caveat there that there was a risk that we might go into a negative balance. So from a committed perspective, the reserve is in a negative balance. So what we presented last week in the Housing Long Range Financial Plan was two components in terms of, we have a good base of predictable funding. That's that 22.9 number with the VUT money. If you look at the 2026 forecast, there's also additional money that we're forecasting from sale, surplus lands, CBCs, et cetera. Those are fluid, right? So they're going to change year over year. At the end of the day, what we're saying in the Housing Long Range Financial Plan is every year when we come back to budget, if some of those projected forecasted numbers come in, bonus, we'll flow that right into the affordable housing plan. So we'll update that number each budget cycle. There may be scenarios where it comes in higher, great. There may be scenarios where it comes in lower. So we may have to calibrate as we go forward. That's why we kind of focused on, if you recall the chart that we presented, it was a kind of like a base good predictable number. Then it was a forecasted number to give a sense of at least the housing team at a good level of, predictable funding and then incremental funding that we would address year over year.
Thank you. And to the strategic staff, assuming that the Housing Accelerator Fund money continues to come in, do we currently have everything in our pipeline funded in terms of new affordable housing?
We currently do not have everything in our pipeline funded. We have funded 1,200 and about 30 units that are fully funded, and they are starting construction. Will students start construction? And just to be very transparent and clear with the committee members, in order to do that, we funded future years allocations of half and also of the known LRFP amounts. In order to fund to the levels that we require for the housing and homelessness plan, but I think, I'm not going to say more importantly, but maybe equally importantly for the Housing Accelerator Fund commitments. Under that agreement, we committed to 2,067 units that would be affordable and delivered by December 31st, 2026. We would need to make use of all available funding sources to be able to get to that target and then unlock the remaining tranche of half.
So is there a plan in the back of your pocket, should there be a change in government and should we not receive half funding? Because that's certainly what one party leader is threatening.
So we're monitoring the situation. We're acting with what is known and continuing down that path until it changes. I guess in the background, we're doing something here around what we might do. One of the things that we are concerned about is diverting funds that will come in to other purposes. So enabling us to kind of move forward. The other aspect that we're looking at is, and I mentioned in the budget presentation, the draft budget presentation, is we're really coming together to look at what are some more innovative and creative approaches that we see kind of emerging across the country that may be relevant and helpful in the context of the City of Ottawa.
Okay, well, I thank you. I wish you the best of luck. And I would just note for those watching, last year when we doubled the affordable housing capital investment, we did not have the funding from the Housing Accelerator Fund. We had not implemented the affordable housing CIP, and we had not made some of those lands available. So, I'm personally satisfied with this capital investment. I would obviously love us to do more. And I certainly hope if any federal politician is watching that they understand how important that Housing Accelerator Fund is to our city. Thank you very much.
Well said, Councillor Troster. Thank you. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Could staff please comment on both the Councillor Johnson motion and Councillor Troster motion?
I could speak to the Councillor Johnson motion. So first off, I would start with saying that an acquisition fund, I guess when there isn't funding constraints, is a very useful tool in building the capacity of the community housing sector and building out their portfolio. It also helpful in terms of preserving the affordability that kind of exists naturally within the private sector as buildings get older and are underinvested in. So there are benefits to it. Our concern with the motion is the request to take a portion of funds coming in through the VUT and allocate it to the purpose of acquisition when the modeling and the analysis that the staff have done internally in order to meet our targets or something like the Housing Accelerator Fund really requires all of the funding to go into the new development. And so our recommendation is to continue the direction of council to focus on new development and contributing equity to those capital stacks to ensure that the homes are being built.
Yeah, so Council Chair, I would kind of elaborate a little bit on that component from my side. I would agree. I mean, the reality is as I just spoke to a Councillor Troster, there's also components of our capital plan we're still forecasted. So we're basically counting on every element to come in. And as Debbie said, the focus right now is to invest in the build side of the equation, which I think that's what we should be focused on in the next 2 or 3 years. So any nickel or dime that we take away from that process will impact that plan there. So that's from my perspective. Councillor Troster's motion, I just quickly saw it there. Totally supportive of it. Just I think there was a last line on the MLTT. Is the motion dedicate all, if we're successful in an MLTT, would it be the expectation that all that money would go to? Because I think it said dedicated to.
I mean, I'm flexible. We could say dedicated in part, just to indicate that this could be a source of funding for acquisition. That would be a friendly amendment if folks are. Let me look at it right now.
Yeah, so I think right there, like such as tax be dedicated. I would say support would be a great word. I don't want to set the false expectation that
if the
all
community shares,
100% that goes there, but
yeah,
definitely
I'm
support.
okay with changing dedicated to
Support.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just identifying it as another potential revenue source to do more in terms of housing. And should we get the permission and should we enact such a tax, then we would obviously have to have a conversation about how to use it. Okay, if you're comfortable with that, I'm fine with that too.
Thanks. And we'll just, if you could just check quickly with the coordinator to make sure we get the appropriate wording in there. Thank you. Do you have any further questions?
Oh,
for
yes.
staff at this
I
point?
just
Oh,
haven't
sorry, with,
started yet.
Councillor Brock. Sorry, Councillor Brockington.
So a land transfer tax, Mr. Rogers, is a tax when someone sells their property and there's an additional tax to be paid?
Yes, Chair, through the chair. So the land transfer tax today is a provincial thing that when you sell your property, there's a provincial land transfer tax. Under the Toronto Act, the municipality of Toronto, they have the ability to do a municipal land transfer tax. So basically, there's a component that they keep in there as a revenue stream. So those are the two components of that motion.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable going down the road of creating another tax in this city despite agreement on what the funds could be used for. So I'll reserve additional comment at this point on that motion and get into some questions about the budget. What does the budget estimate for a general manager's salary? Does the budget include an expectation that we will have a full-time general manager in place at some point in 2025?
Through the chair, yes. So basically, we budget as per our budget policy. We budget for a full-time equivalent. So basically, even though my colleague, Ms. Chi, is interim, she's still the budget is still there for a full-time position.
What is the department estimating the landscape will look like next year with respect to applications for zoning amendments, applications for site plans, building permit applications? What are we forecasting the industry will look like next year?
Chair, we are seeing some recovery with respect to our planning application fees for September and October. We have seen a considerable recovery. So when we set our budget projections for next year, we look at a 5-year average. We look back to a 5-year average for each of those different application types and carry that forward into next year. So we don't react or overreact from one great year or one bad year. We try to identify a norm, and that's the basis for our budget.
So if there's an increase in demand for any or all of the 3 items I've mentioned, you have sufficient staff in place to meet that demand?
Chair, we added a considerable amount of new staff through the Bill 109 report in order to meet those legislated timelines. We've changed our processes to meet those timelines. We've been doing a great job, I think, in meeting those timelines under Bill 109. It's hard to predict exactly what the volumes are. And as if we see a peak levels like we saw in 2021, there would be strain on staff. I'm not going to pretend that there wouldn't be, but when we look at our projections and what we expect to happen next year, I think we're in a good place with the additional staff that we've added through Bill 109.
If MPAC does an assessment next year, what impact, if any, is there on our planning staff here at the City of Ottawa as far as work demands?
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure I understand the question with respect to MPAC.
If properties are reassessed in this province, there'll be a flood of questions that come in from property owners. And while we will do our best to redirect folks to MPAC, no doubt many will come to our planning department. So is this a concern or not a concern at all?
Chair, maybe I would suspect that the majority of those would come to my area in Joseph Shop from a revenue perspective, because that would be impacting more of the existing as opposed to the new build process. And we always count on those blips in terms of we typically staff up our call center, and we do that by typically shifting staff from existing duties to that when we have those blips.
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming next year. I would bet money I would be after the provincial election, but certainly our comms department will have to have an initiative in place to react to this. The budget includes $900,000 for the zoning bylaw review initiative. What exactly does that cover? Is that salary or is it some components other than salary?
Thank you. Because the zoning bylaw is being done in-house, so it covers the salaries of the staff that have been working on it for like this year with the 2024 budgets. This is for 2025.
So sorry, the 900,000 is salary?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, fair enough. And finally, the council endorsed a designation, a historic designation for the veterans' homes in Carlington a couple of years ago. We were supposed to have street sign blades, plaque, other visual components. Not a huge cost, but I'm told that cost has what has contributed to the delay in proceeding with this installation. What plans, if any, are in place for next year to complete this project?
Counselor, I'd like to take that one away. I know that I've spoken with my staff about that project. I'm confident we can find a way forward for implementation next year. I'll get back to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Vice Chair Gower.
Okay, Councillor Brockington took a few of my questions, but I wanted to follow up on the question of legal staff. That's part of the, as it relates to planning applications, that's part of the finance and corporate services budget. Is that right?
Chair, I believe is there some in your shop, maybe? Just, I know that there is a bulk of it in the FinCorp one in Stewart's shop, but I'm not sure if there's any legal directly in the planning team. I don't think so, right? No, it's all, so it would all be in FinCorp. Yeah.
Right. Although there's some legal fees that are part of this planning budget. My concern is similar to, do we have enough staff to meet a potential increase in volume of planning applications? Do we have enough legal staff? I don't know if staff can answer that here, though.
Mr. Chair, I can answer that in part. We've gone through 2 hiring rounds. We are in the third to complete fully staffing the law clerk positions. And so I'm confident that should we be successful in filling the last 3 positions, we will be well placed to respond to development applications in 2025.
So in the next year, we'll see a reduction in timelines for legal forms and legal agreements to be completed relating to planning applications?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can staff break down a little bit the $3 million in capital investment needed for the official plan update? What makes up that amount?
Chair, that would be, the bulk of that would be staff time involved across different service areas to evaluate the growth projections stemming from the Ministry of Finance population projections, and then an evaluation of potential options for any urban or village area expansions should that be required. So that would be also looking at transportation and infrastructure services capacity as well.
And that 3 million, if we compare it to the official plan process that we did in the last term, how does that amount compare, or how is it different?
Mr. Chair, that amount is very comparable to the official plan review conducted in the last review.
Okay. I want to move on to Councillor Trosser's motion, and I wanted to ask, that last clause is raising a big red flag for me. And have you had a discussion with the mayor's office on introducing a new municipal land transfer tax?
Nope. I'm merely asking for the possibility of maybe being able to discuss it one day.
Okay. I think it's a big red flag because it is a major tax policy change. And I suspect the mayor has probably had conversations. I don't want to speak for the mayor, but in terms of whether or not a new municipal land transfer tax makes sense for Ottawa, what impact it would have on housing affordability, whether it should be directed towards housing, whether it should be directed towards transit or infrastructure. I would encourage the mover to take that last clause out and have a conversation with the mayor on overall strategy and provincial government support to Ottawa before this committee is asked to vote on that suggestion.
Yeah, I'm content to leave it in. I do think it's important to have that conversation. This committee is where we bring up new ideas. It did come as a suggestion from the community, and, you know, I'm content to leave it in. Again, this is not really a conversation about whether this is something we want to pursue. It's a conversation about whether this is something we maybe one day might want to have the option to discuss. I think it speaks to our lack of fiscal tools. I think it speaks to the incredibly difficult position that municipalities have been put in. So, you know, I think we can debate the motion the way it is. And if folks disagree, that's also cool. You know, I think we're grasping at straws here in a really unfair fiscal environment. So I would rather put the possibility of solutions forward, you know, to open that conversation. And obviously, this is something I would absolutely discuss with the mayor's office before I went to council. And if any amendments might be encouraged at that point.
Okay, thank you. I will vote against it, and I'm glad you're willing to have that discussion with the mayor, because I think there may be implications that this committee may not be immediately aware of. I'll leave that there. On the acquisition fund, do staff have any insight, any more than what was in the memo provided to us in terms of, number one would be timeline for when the federal government may introduce their funding, and also any conditions? For example, would it be contingent on a municipal contribution? So if any more details that may not have been available when that memo was released a couple weeks ago.
The only detail that we have, which would be as of yesterday, is that it remains a high priority and that the intent would be able to roll it out soon, but there's no further details nor on the design of the fund.
Yeah, okay, thank you. On the last few years, the city has supported acquisitions through our capital fund. Is there an internal target? Do we say every year we're going to be contributing 5%, 2%, a portion of that? Or is it just more opportunistically when there are projects that make sense?
Chair and Councillor, thank you for the question. I do feel at this time it has been more of an opportunistic approach, the way that we have handled acquisitions. I think we do fully recognize that we are missing a robust program and financial source to do this. And so that has been the reason why we have dealt with these as one-offs.
Okay. And I wonder if staff could remind us again, looking at our long-range financial plan for housing, there's provincial money and federal money that is guaranteed, or sorry, federal money that is guaranteed until what year?
There's provincial money through the Building Faster Fund. That money is not guaranteed. It's earned based on achievement of preset targets. There is also federal funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. That funding also is not guaranteed. It is earned based on the achievement of milestones tied to initiatives that were agreed to in the signing of that contract. For the final tranche, the final 44 million, in addition to having achieved all the milestones for all of the initiatives that were part of that agreement, there is also the need to achieve housing construction targets are set at building permits, so building permits approved. Overall, it's 37,500, and for affordable housing, it's 2,067. And then there are other categories of housing types that also must be met. The way that the federal government or the CMHC staff have explained it to me is that if you hit a portion of your target, but you're close, you may get penalized. If you're missing your target by a significant amount, you may find your funding at risk. So taking quite a firm position in terms of meeting the terms of the agreement that we signed.
Okay, I'm going to have some more comments on the acquisition piece, but I'll let colleagues go first. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Lowe.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm gonna, I guess, shift topics a little bit and go into the actual bit of the book there. I'm just, you know, I was sort of looking over some of the numbers yesterday, and the, you know, in one of the, for ROHUD, for example, the manager's office, the budgeted amount was 471,000, and the actual forecast amount ended up being 921. So I'm just curious, and then the estimate, so therefore the budgeted amount for 2025 is 491, just an increase of 20,000. So with with that plus the actual amount from 2023 being such a blowout of the budgeted amount, I guess one, what happened, and then two, is that enough?
Thanks, Councillor, for the question. I can certainly appreciate as it's presented, it looks a bit mysterious. So what that is it's for temporary staff that are in my office related to the land management system project. That's our future project and our map replacement. So they are temporary staff. So they are shown as a pressure on my office, but it is offset by the capital budget that's in this draft capital budget that's before you. So there's a credit in terms of that quantum.
Okay, that's fair. My second question is it's sort of I think it's more of an umbrella question about what we do with built heritage. I know there are provincial requirements in terms of built heritage. Are we sort of just doing what the province wants us to do? Do we do a lot more over and above what's required? Because I'm thinking back to some of the arguments that were made, not here, but just in general over the year about the downstream effects, mostly negative, about the way that we do building preservation and everything. Because I'm thinking about the way that Bank Street is zoned or is going to be zoned with the new zoning bylaw. It's going to be up to 9 or 14 stories, I think, on main streets, something like that. And if we become really restrictive with it, we're sort of keeping it to 2-3 stories. Like, I'm just maybe thinking out loud here, but what do we do above and beyond what the province actually requires us for built heritage?
So certainly, Councillor, as a municipality, we're compelled to comply with the Ontario Heritage Act. So the programs that we run are in conformity with the existing provincial legislation. I'll add, though, that our new official plan is quite prescriptive in terms of finding that balance between conservation and affordability and growth. And so certainly my team works quite closely with Mr. Moody's team on applications to ensure that we're meeting the council intended goals of preservation and conservation while balancing the need for more affordable housing in our city. And I can certainly think of many projects that have come forward this year where we've been able to unlock capacity while also maintaining a designated property. Also, some of our plans that we brought forward recently, our Lower Town and Byward Market Heritage Conservation District plans, for example, they've been in conformity with our new official plan, and we've seen streets like Dalhousie that traditionally had a 4-story cap on the height in the old heritage plan move up to 9 in conformity with the new official plan. So certainly we are very mindful of council's overarching goals for housing affordability and move forward in our policies and our programs to remove any barriers as such.
Okay, thank you. My last question then is surrounding the acquisition motion. Understanding that the HAF sort of, I think, leans more into new construction than what the motion proposes. Is there room for advocacy on our part, maybe staff's part as well, to maybe change some of that a little bit so that it is more friendly towards something like acquisition?
The Government of Canada program, the Housing Accelerator Fund, really is about accelerating the production of new housing. It is its sole purpose. And it encourages municipalities to do that in a variety of ways, really looking at streamlining and transforming how we move through approvals processes, for example, and looking at more novel and innovative approaches to encouraging the production of housing supply. But it is very much a supply program. So in that case, there would be little room to negotiate on acquisition, given that that doesn't create new housing, it is existing supply.
Okay, within that context, are there any programs that help with acquisition?
I'm not aware of programs currently that help with acquisition. The federal budget 2024 committed or put forward a acquisition program as a $1.5 billion program. It is expected to be announced sometime soon, but we don't have further details on that. And that program includes a low-cost loan component as well as grants.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you. I will be brief because several of my questions were asked in respect to the budget itself. I did have questions about the motions, particularly one process related about Councillor Troster's. I was very comfortable with your motion before the addition of that last section. And
I'm going to pull it. I'm going to pull the last clause. Just to be clear.
Well, I
Just
feel
change-
better.
Yeah, just changed my mind.
Apparently,
okay.
all I had to do was bring, no, I'm
Drama committee. No, I'm going to pull it because I want to take some time. I don't want to have it ruled out of order before the idea even gets out the gate because it was a fairly spontaneous piece. I might consider reintroducing it at council, or I might just wait.
That's wonderful to hear. I just, because I won't like belabor the point. I think there's immense value in having this conversation, but you know, we're kind of seeing this for the first time and getting our ducks in a row, getting the mayor on board. So that, okay, my question's done on that part. I just wanted to speak really quickly about Councillor Johnson's. I absolutely appreciate the intent behind it. I will not be supporting it. The thing that really struck me was, staff's response to it, but also, as Cyril mentioned, if we have any money right now, I want it going into building. We provincially, we were required to, build as much as we can to open the doors for development to happen. And knowing that the federal rental protection fund is coming and we have every confidence that it is a priority. I want to make sure we're focusing all of our attention on what we're supposed to be doing and need to be doing. That doesn't mean that if that falls through or if they only come in and it's a half measure of some sort, that we can't revisit it. But I think it's premature right now for us to be creating a specific fund that would be potentially duplicating. I've thought a lot too about, the duplication of where we put our money in terms of getting the most bang for our buck. And, Ottawa Community Housing is a phenomenal arm's length agency that I really do. Once again, our chair is part of this committee, Chair Kavanagh. I really want us to see more involvement with that agency. So even if we had any money that is in addition to this budget, future budgets, for us to continue to work with them in a way that we can, build more, do more, look at acquisitions through them if they're interested. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I think that is, an untapped resource that we have been tapping, but we can do more with them. So I appreciate this attempt. I will not be supporting it. I don't know if it will pass, and then we'll have further conversation at council. But I think at this point in time, any cent we have needs to go into what we're supposed to be doing, is building homes now. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Just before we go to Councillor Johnson, it's Councillor Troster. Okay, in that case, we'll go to Councillor Johnson. I just want to sort out exactly what we'll be voting on with respect to the Troster motion. Yeah. Folks, can we take 5 minutes? We'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, members, we have quorum. We are just waiting. Okay. Councillor Johnson, we have quorum and you are up next. And I can just confirm, Councillor Chaucer? Ariel? Sorry. Your motion that we'll be voting on at the end of discussion is now back to that which you originally presented to the committee,
Yes,
right?
I have removed the last clause. There was no more request to create a new tax, but stay tuned. There might be in the future, but point taken about process.
And I assume that that modification is made to the modification with the will of committee. So we'll vote on that. Councillor Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I just want to take an opportunity to speak to my motion because certainly many of my questions on budget have been answered. I think that I don't need to go over the stats again about what impact affordable housing loss is having on our housing system. We have seen estimates of 31 units lost for every unit of new construction. And so the housing system and the efforts that we make to support it, it's like having a leaky rowboat. We are losing units at a faster rate than we can construct them. And I know that some of the pushback has been around, why now? Why would the city do this with their own funds? So I'll take a bit of time to answer those questions from my perspective. But I really do believe that given the economic uncertainty and the political uncertainty that we're seeing, for all the reasons that you feel anxious about contributing money to an acquisition fund, it's actually the exact right time to do it. We would be able to control funds that are within our purview. We would be able to see protection of housing unit sizes that are otherwise not being built. We would be able to ensure that affordable housing can stay near transit, can stay in properly served neighborhoods. If we think about the conversation at Lansdowne, we found that that land was too valuable to make it work for affordable housing, and we decided to take revenue out of the air rights to put affordable housing somewhere else. That is what the economics of our time are creating for us. And so an acquisition fund is the way for us to address that loss. So why now instead of waiting until the federal folks reveal details? Because those in the housing sector are calling for existing funds to be in place. The federal release of the first tranche of funds within that will go towards actors that can already stack existing capital. If we don't have capital to stack, we may lose in that first round of funding. And if that's the case, if we're building 565 new units in 2025, the math says we could lose close to 17,000. That's why it's urgent to do it now. The other reason why it's urgent to do it now is because the funding that I targeted, the VUT, is expected to decline year over year. If it does what it's supposed to do, it should correct, and it should not be an existing source of funds year over year. The largest chunk of money that we'll get from the VUT is actually in 2025, and then it declines. So it's a perfect bridge for a federal fund to come online, and it could have the greatest dollars going into it. So I don't really care who accesses the acquisition fund. It could be Ottawa Community Housing. It could be the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition or Aboriginal Services that are seeking land and space right now for their ambitions. It could be any other actor. The point is that the city has to demonstrate its readiness to be a partner with the federal government when that fund comes online. And might I remind you that when it comes to new construction, we've already seen an erosion of what we can do with our cash. In the long-range financial plan for housing, we saw a 50% per door increase of costs from 2021 to 2024. That is not going to change. And in fact, I said this before, but with a presidential election in the United States, we rely on lumber, on aluminum, on steel and copper pipe. This is real. His tariffs are being understood as catastrophic potentially for the global economy. So we need another option. This is to have another option. I very carefully made sure that this didn't look at property tax increases. It didn't move money from the Housing Accelerator Fund, but it looked at the closest we could get to new money. And if the margins are as narrow as they are for our existing housing targets, then if we're going to stay true to the vision of the city's housing and homelessness plan, then we need to demonstrate other options for us to actually address affordable housing loss now, not in 5 years from now. I'll have some closing remarks, but I'll leave it there for now, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Chair. We realize that we have concerns about what's happening out there in terms of the demevictions and renovictions that are happening. And we've asked staff to write policies on this, and we're having some reports that are coming on this. One I proposed, one Councillor Troster proposed on demevictions and renovictions. We need those places to be protected. I am concerned about using the funds that for the VUT on anything but new builds. That's what it was supposed to be for. I support acquisitions. I mean, OCH did a huge acquisition of 311 family units without the assistance of a fund. They did it within their funds, and that's fantastic. And as has been stated by the general manager, sometimes just luck. These opportunities come up. You got to be ready for them, and the large scale is great. We do need to keep those housings affordable, but so I can't support Councillor Johnson's motion. I get the intention, but I think we need to wait and see what is coming up with the federal government. I know we're all kind of antsy about what's going to happen in the future, but I think it's really important to this should be done at their level. Right now we've been mandated to build new builds, and that's the funds that we need. So that's where I am on that. I do have some questions about the budget. And before I forget, I'm going to read the direction to staff that from Councillor Menard. Just a second. Okay, maybe I'll ask my questions first and then get the motion up. My question is oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay, I'll do that now. That staff be directed to explore the public builder model of affordable housing provision alongside other alternative approaches to accelerating and making more efficient the production of affordable housing, including through new partnership models, innovative building techniques, and financing approaches, and in consideration of a potential role for the city, Build Ottawa, and OCHC, and report back by Q4 2025. Thank you. And I believe that has been vetted by staff, so they're aware of it and support it. I wanted to ask
Councillor Kavanaugh, we just want to make sure we ask them explicitly. Will you undertake to do that as direction?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought you were asking me. Sure. My new power. Anyway, my questions are in terms of staffing. One of the things that I keep coming across in terms of building more affordable housing is the number of small developers, such as churches and other religious institutions that have land and need help to develop their properties. So these are great smaller scale projects, usually in very good locations. And they're always coming to councillors like myself, and they need help. Are we going to have staff that is specifically geared to this smaller builder to make sure we get those missing middle projects done?
Chair, through you. Thank you, Counselor, for the question. And so the short answer is yes. And I would be happy to follow up with you offline to talk about how we, support some of those projects. We do know that much of our funding is allocated for, but we are, consistently trying to grow a pipeline, understand where those demands and supply issues are, and look for potential partners in the community that might be able to support developments such as this, including the private sector. So I'd be happy to chat with you more about that.
Thank you. I think that's really important. And right now, with stage 2 LRT construction, Bay Ward is a hotbed right now. And we have a lot of church properties. The churches can no longer pay the bills, and yet they're land rich and very anxious to work with us. But because you're working with volunteers and people who do not have past expertise on planning, they need their hands held. And I think that we can work with them. I have at least 4. So I just wanted to make sure that that's something that we do, as well as other projects. So overall, obviously, affordable housing is a huge part of what we're doing, and OCH is all set to go. I want to make sure that we're also looking at ways to streamline, and I think that means making sure we have enough staff to work with nonprofits, particularly at OCH, on projects. Is it that we're getting specific people assigned to help?
30 seconds.
As I always say, grease the wheels to make projects go faster.
Chair, through you, each of the large housing projects that we are working through right now, we do offer a housing developer, and it's sort of a concierge service, and that's somebody that really helps them working very closely with Derek Moody's team in development review to get through that planning process, to work through financials and performas to fund projects. So we very much do offer that service on our pipeline projects. We are very busy right now. We have a lot being thrown at us in the way of, different requests and working with partners. So we are trying to ensure that we are staffed to take on that mandate and capitalize on that tremendous funding opportunity that we have before us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to staff for their work on this budget and the good discussion here today. I just wanted to just pick up on 2 quick, and thanks to Councillor Kavanaugh as well for reading in that direction, and for staff for working with my office on it. I just wanted to pick up on 2 points, Chair. One is around the acquisitions fund, because as I understand it, there is support generally from staff to eventually have something like this in place in combination with our federal partners, because they also see the concern about the loss of those naturally occurring affordable housing areas, the NOAAs, and the concern that just building isn't going to get us there on our own. There is some validity to what Councillor Johnson and the academics that have talked to us are saying, that there is a need in this case, but how we get there is the question that I think they're questioning. So, Chair, just to get confirmation from staff on those points, that there is some value in an acquisitions-based approach, not just building.
Through the chair, acquisitions can be part of a multi-pronged approach to supporting affordable housing, and in particular to growing the portfolios within the community housing sector. And the advantage of that is that there's community housing sector is mission driven, so you get longer term affordability. There are challenges with a acquisition fund as well, and so there would need to be careful consideration into the design of a program to ensure that risks to the city are minimized, to ensure that the outcomes that align with council's directions are being achieved, and to mitigate some of the risks that come from acquiring older housing stock with tenants who are paying low rents, owners who are picking up mortgages with still relatively high interest rates and tenants not being able to carry those carrying costs. So it's more complex than just purchasing a building and then the affordability carries on. So we do think that it's part of the toolkit that can be useful for affordable housing with the right proponents under the right circumstances and through a well-designed program, and hopefully one that is, supported by other levels of government, because the city resources would otherwise be diverted into a number of different ways. And my concern would be whether we're, able to make significant dents on any front.
That's really helpful response and was consistent with my understanding. And, I also want to thank Councillor Johnson, because Councillor Johnson is just trying to get to a place that I think we need to go in the best way possible, right? And she mentioned around, the tax route, this route, but trying to respond to what those market needs are. Do staff see that the market needs that we are losing a large amount of affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing for each unit that we build? Are those statistics playing out in staff's own numbers from what they review?
Chair, I'll start anecdotally, and maybe Geraldine or Lauren, if you have some numbers, you can jump in. So we know that naturally occurring affordable housing, especially if it's well located and near where we're putting in transit lines, is at risk, and we do lose that stock. That is absolutely the case. In terms of I know the team has done some analysis to look at the numbers that were put forward by the academics earlier and brought to council earlier. And perhaps somebody can comment on that analysis. Possible.
Just checking to see if we do have Lauren Reeves on the call. I don't think we have that info in front of us, but we're happy to bring that back and share it.
There's some question at the table as to whether that was something that's members asked staff to do at the end of the Pomeroy presentation. So it's possible that you're working on that.
And Chair, we could get that to you before council if that were to be an option.
Thank you.
That'd be really helpful. I get the thrust of Councillor Johnson's motion here. It's that there's advantages to having acquisition over just building, and that we're seeing the effects of it, and it has to be designed well, certainly. So, completely understand it, and feel like there needs to be more support within our municipality about our direction going forward on this. If we're waiting for the federal government, who knows what federal government we're going to have, but if we're waiting for them to set something up, but we're still seeing losses in our city, then we likely need our own strategy outside of just waiting on the federal government is what I'll say. The second point I wanted just to make, Chair, is on the, and I understand the motion has been changed now by Councillor Troster, but on the land transfer tax, my understanding is staff have previously supported this through finance and have asked the provincial government for that power in the past.
Through the chair, specifically, I think, are you referring to the MLTT components? Because I think that's been something that's been, circulated or talked about for many times now, I guess. So the reality is that's obviously something that I would support. It's just a matter of what's the best avenue to get there.
Yeah, no kidding. I obviously, as a municipality and AMO and FCM, we were always looking for revenue tools that make sense, that don't harm people that are at their lowest income levels. And that's exactly what the MLTT does. It sets a threshold. And I think Councillor Troster has talked about, has brought it forward, and then we've changed it. Understandable, given the conversation at committee. But just to say, this is not something that staff haven't looked into as a benefit for the municipality. And it's not something that would be formulated in policy if we did get the power from the province. We would have a lot of work to do, Chair. to how this would work, the threshold with which it would work, and the cost of homes, whether they be above $1 million or $2 million, with which we would apply this type of a threshold, this type of a MLTT. So just to say, the idea is a good one. Toronto uses this to benefit their residents. This would be a big benefit for the city of Ottawa. And I think we need more discussion about it about how it could work here, and asking the province for it, and understand the mayor's discussions with the provincial government as well. So, but just to say, staff have previously talked to the province about this, and there is general support for municipal revenue tools of this sort. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that Councillor Troster has heard this morning, and the rest of the committee probably feel as well, is it's not a discussion we want to have on the fly, and is probably best done as a report to a councillor's report or something similar to FinCo at some point. So,
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not letting it go. I plan to reintroduce it, but obviously it was a very late addition to a motion. It's not the way to do it, but we can follow up after this meeting, Sean, because I think it has a lot of potential, but it also needs to factor into our broader negotiations with the province, and I understand that.
Amazing. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Menard?
Nope, that all makes sense. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Vice Chair Gower? Ralston, we're going to throw to Ralston. Councillor King?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to ask some questions on the budget. I just wanted to really ask, I had two questions, but one question that's a clarifying question around heritage and heritage planning. So just in response to the line of questions that were asked by Councillor Lowe, the major item that I see in this budget is really underlines additional funding to support the Heritage Grant Program due to the increase in heritage designations due to Bill 23. So I was wondering if staff could really elaborate on what those dollars, that $100,000 would be funding.
Thanks for the question, Chair. Yes, Councillor, as you noted, as a result of provincial legislative changes, city staff have been endeavoring to undertake more proactive designations of properties in Ottawa. In a typical year, we would designate 5 to 7 properties, and this year we will surpass 50. So with that becomes an obligation on the part of the City of Ottawa to provide grants and financial relief for custodians of these properties. As you've indicated, a report, Chair, was brought forward to Build Heritage Committee earlier this year, reinvigorating that program to provide new channels, and there is an additional budget seek through this budget consideration to expand that program and its financial parameters.
I appreciate that answer. So just for clarity, we're not going above and beyond our legislative authority. My understanding, being chair of a Built Heritage Committee, is that we are frankly one of the most prescribed and circumscribed committees that are in the council system at the City of Ottawa. That we are primarily dealing with increases in terms of designation due to changes to Bill 23. And we are really ensuring that the resources are being put into place to ensure that we can cope with those increased designations that are outlined under Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act.
Chair, I would agree with Build Heritage Committee Chair's assertion. And I think that as committee members see it, this committee, several reports have come forward this year from my team or Mr. Moody's team, where Heritage has actually unlocked development potential on lands and also contributed to Council's additional goal of sustainable development. And as we know, the best development is one that reuses existing materials. And certainly, I think in numerous files this year, we've demonstrated we found that balance with housing affordability and other public good goals.
Thank you for that. And I only had one more question, Chair, that deals with the land management solution, the dollars that are being spent on that. I'm just wondering if staff can outline how the implementation of the new solution will aid in increased efficiencies, reducing costs, and cutting red tape.
Chair, the land management solution that has, I think there's a demonstration in the first phase that we've seen some of the good work through building code services as they've launched this fall. But as we look forward, there's a couple of drivers, and it's not just about efficiencies and driving streamlining, but there's also a recognition that our current tracking software is at end of life. It is no longer serviced, and it has to be replaced. As we do look forward to land management solution, there is going to be a greater opportunity for our clients to track in real time where their applications are within the process. There'll be a greater communication ability with those clients as well as with members of the public. And it'll give us as managers an opportunity to have better tracking tools to monitor and track projects and files as they go through the process to identify early when something is going off the rails or running into speed bumps within its process.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate those answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. Vice Chair Gower.
Thanks, Chair. I just had some quick comments on the acquisition piece. And as I've been listening, I think it's a good reminder how precarious our affordable housing funding is from all three levels of government, even Ottawa. I do think acquisition is a good idea. And I think the staff memo did a really good job at outlining how city funding has been used to support acquisitions, and they have been effective. They come with some risk, but overall, I think they're a good thing. And sometimes those acquisitions happen without city funding as well, like the OCH Minto acquisition, over 300 homes. But I'm not going to support the motion because I think we need to ensure we give staff as much flexibility as possible with the limited capital funding that we have to make decisions that make sense in the current conditions. So even if we're earmarking a bit of money for acquisitions, that's money that might not go towards new builds. And we have federal Housing Accelerator Fund funding. It's contingent on meeting a target. It's also contingent on support from whatever government is in charge. So I think that's a huge amount of risk right now. There is no dedicated provincial affordable housing fund. That's an amount that's at risk and a hole in our long-term budget. And even the VUT that we're relying on for current funding and is being proposed for acquisition funding, I mean, that's even a risk. I think it's okay till the end of this term, but a new set of councillors in 2026 might decide differently, could very well decide differently. So even that's at risk. And we have a target with the Housing Accelerator Fund of over 2,000 units. Every dollar that we can squeeze towards new build is a benefit to meeting that. I hope we blow through that. OCH has 1,450 shovel-ready projects ready to go that are just waiting for that funding. So every dollar that we can put towards providers like OCH to get shovels in the ground helps us not only meet that goal, but hopefully exceed it. So I hope we do continue to support acquisitions where there's an opportunity to do so. But I think every dollar of capital funding that we have has to support new builds at this point, given the targets we're looking to meet with the other levels of government. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Johnson with a bit of wrap up.
No. Thank you, Chair. So I think, we've talked a lot about the facts and figures. I think I'm going to close with a personal story. So I used to know a man named Phil, which is not his real name, but he is a real guy. And Phil used to live down the street from me and my family. And I'm not really sure how I met Phil, but he ended up working for my husband for a while. He bought our kids Christmas presents. He had a snow blowing business. He was sort of a handyman, and he was precariously housed. And he lives in a building in my old neighborhood. It couldn't be more convenient, centrally located to transit. It's not in the best shape, but he can afford it. And he can, with the help of the local food center that he frequents sometimes when things are lean, he can keep good food on the table. And then he can spend his money at the Giant Tiger or the local coffee shop. If Phil's building was to go to a private market actor, I'm certain that Phil would not be able to live there anymore. He can't afford to lose that home. His past was one of abuse, trauma, addiction, and poverty. And he's been as clean as long as I know him. He volunteers at that food center. I wouldn't have been able to snowblow that property without him doing it. And so because he gave me an affordable rate, I then have more money to put back into the local economy. Acquisition protects Phil and people like Phil from losing their home and ending up homeless in a way that attainable housing, which is what many of our targets are trying to do, will never do. Acquisition means that someone who is Phil's contemporary, who is trying to come out of homelessness, as we discussed with Mr. Tilley, can also find housing for him or her. Acquisition means that affordable housing can still be found in neighborhoods that are gentrifying. And those deeply affordable neighborhoods are gentrifying or have gentrified, so that residents like me can build relationships with residents like Phil. When Phil had heart trouble, our friends could drive him to and from the hospital so he could get back on his feet. And these cross-class relationships, I think, are one of the reasons it's thrive. And when we don't have diverse neighborhoods, why we end up further othering each other, which I think is incredibly relevant right now to our housing context in the city of Ottawa. Acquisition helps to keep those affordable homes where they are. Phil's building was a 6-unit building. It wasn't a big building. And this acquisition fund would help to make a big difference in preserving small, scattered site, small scale housing. I appreciate the conversation about Ottawa community housing. Absolutely, I do. I think they're a fabulous actor and they've got great projects in the pipeline. But to put small scale providers in competition, even in a general term with Ottawa community housing, is incredibly short-sighted. And our housing branch could actually do way more to create the vision of that network and how the funding works within that network to support everybody. But that hasn't happened here. We need to plug the rowboat up. The IPD that we saw in acquisition, I believe, actually showed a reticence to demonstrate that leadership. And that's why I brought this motion forward, even knowing that there was a lot of pushback. I've never experienced such pushback on it. However, I think that that is exactly the reason why we need to get creative and we need to dig deep and we need to create opportunities for everybody. So why acquisition? Because it's cheaper. We can get more doors. It can be mixed with other capital, and it serves those that are the most likely to fall into homelessness and have the most complex needs. Again, this fund doesn't seek to direct the criteria or eligibility. We can do that when the federal program comes online, and we can be ready to tailor it in response to that funding. So this is us doing what we can in the way that we can to do more with less. That's it. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. So I am convinced by Councillor Johnson's arguments. I'll be supporting the motion. I want to make sure that it's very clear that it's not a choice between a good thing to do and a bad thing to do. We have the option here of two good paths to go down. Construction and acquisition are both extremely necessary. And while I appreciate that staff have prioritized construction, acquisition is critical. Councillor Johnson has spoken about the timeliness of starting that work. Our meeting, I believe, in 2 weeks will be particularly fraught as a high-profile development comes in front of us that will result in the eviction of tenants from very affordable housing. And those tenants are going to eventually be, presumably, pressure on the affordable housing system. It may be that if we take some increment of the vacant unit tax over and above what is forecast and put that into acquisition, that some pipeline projects are a little slower to get built. But it could mean that some tenants stay in their apartments, which could mean that we need less of those pipeline projects over the midterm to begin with. It is a choice between two very good things to do, and I'm voting for Councillor Johnson's motion because I believe that we should do both. So that's my wrap on that motion. Otherwise, I'm going to vote for the budget. No surprise there. Okay, so Kelly, what are we doing? Right. Do we need to read the roadmap motion? We're just going to pass the budget. Okay, so first, there is a technical motion before we get to the roadmap. Is the technical motion carried?
Carried.
Carried. We don't got to read the whole thing, do we? Okay, you know what, Vice Chair, could you give us the roadmap motion, please?
Okay. That Planning and Housing Committee recommend that council sitting as committee of the whole approve the Planning and Housing Committee 2025 draft operating and capital budget as follows. 1, the Planning, Development and Building Services Department operating budget as follows. General Manager's Office and Business and Technical Support Services operating resource requirement, page 2. Right-of-way heritage and urban design services, user fees, pages 6 to 10. Operating resource requirement, page 4 and 5. Planning services, user fees, pages 13 to 19. Operating resource requirement, page 12. Building code services, user fees, pages 22 to 29. Operating resource requirement, page 21. Strategic Initiatives Department, Affordable Housing Development Operating Resource Requirement, page 31. And 3, the Planning Committee Capital Budget revised, page 32, with individual projects listed on revised pages 48 to 50, Housing Services, and 51 to 54, Planning and Development.
That's a great motion. Thank you. Does that carry? Thank you, colleagues. Let's move into the next motions. The Troster motion is now back to the way form in which it was originally presented. Do we need a voice vote on that? No, is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And let's have a vote on the Johnson motion, please.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
No.
Councillor Dudas,
No.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh, Councillor Kavanaugh,
Sorry about that. No. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly,
No.
Councillor Kitts,
No.
Councillor Lowe,
No.
Councillor Tierney,
No.
Councillor Troster,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gower,
No.
and Chair,
Yes.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Okay, thank you very much. So that wraps up a discussion of item 5.1 and item 7.1. Oh, is it carried as, oh, what? Did we not vote on that? I thought we just carried it as amended. Is that carried as amended? Thank you. All right, I got what they need. 7.1 was wrapped up with 5.1. I don't have any notices of motion for subsequent meetings. Nope. There were no inquiries that I'm aware of ahead of time. Nope. We have no other business, so we're adjourned until Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. That'll be a longer one. Bring snacks. Thank you very much, colleagues.